Malcolm sat alone in the far corner of the tech lab, typing quietly while the others chatted near the coffee machine. He didn't talk much. Not because he didn't have anything to say, but because every time he tried, no one listened. Most of the younger engineers thought he was just the IT guy, the one who fixed broken printers or ran cables under desks. They didn't know he had built secure systems for military-grade projects 10 years ago, or that he had 3 patents under his name. He didn't show off, never bragged, and never reminded people what he was capable of. He came in early, stayed late, and kept his head down. If a system broke, he fixed it. If a junior engineer needed help, he quietly gave advice, but let them take the credit. He was the kind of man people forgot in the room, but remembered when something stopped working. His badge said Malcolm D. Network Specialist, but that title didn't explain who he really was. He was a father, a widower, and a man trying to raise a brilliant daughter in a world that still didn't believe people like him belonged in boardrooms. The company he worked for was one of the top names in global tech, developing systems used by governments, banks, and space agencies. They had just landed a $1 billion contract, but with it came a problem no one had expected. Somewhere deep in the new codebase, a bug was hiding, one that kept crashing the whole system. Every team had taken a shot at it, from AI experts to security architects, but nothing worked. Meetings became louder, tempers shorter, and deadlines closer. No one even thought to ask Malcolm what he thought. He was just the quiet man in the corner, typing reports and updating firmware. At home, things were different. His daughter Ziri was the center of his world. She was 13, sharp as a blade, and full of questions he sometimes couldn't answer. Where other kids played video games, Ziri wrote little games of her own. She once built a robot spider from scrap parts just to scare the cat. Malcolm smiled every time he watched her. She reminded him of his wife, who had passed away 5 years ago, leaving behind only memories and the smell of vanilla in her pillow. Zori had inherited her mother's brains and his quiet focus. They lived in a small apartment in the city. Nothing fancy, but full of warmth, books, and half-finished inventions. She once asked him, "Dad, do people at your work know how smart you are?" He had just smiled and said, "That's not important, sweet pea. What matters is that I know." But sometimes, late at night, he wondered what would happen if he ever got the chance to show what he could really do. Oh, not for fame, not for money, but just once for someone to look him in the eye and say, "I see you." On Friday evening, Malcolm was told he had to come in over the weekend. The system issue had become an emergency, and the CEO himself was flying back to handle it. He didn't complain, just nodded, packed his bag, and thought of Zuri. The next morning, he couldn't find a sitter, so he brought Zuri along. She had headphones, a tablet, and a backpack full of snacks. She promised to stay quiet, and he trusted her. They entered the building, and the guards barely looked at him. Just another tech guy with his kid, they thought. In the conference room, expensive suits filled the chairs, and whiteboards were covered in notes, formulas, and red X's. Everyone looked tired. Some looked angry. Malcolm found his usual spot, plugged in his laptop, and stayed quiet. Ziri sat in the corner, her eyes scanning the giant monitor on the wall, where streams of code flashed like a waterfall of letters. No one noticed her, just like no one noticed him, but both father and daughter had something special, something the rest of the room was too busy to see. As the hours passed, Zori's eyes stayed locked on the monitor. She tilted her head, squinting, as if reading a secret message inside the chaos. She didn't understand all the code, but she saw something, a pattern, a rhythm, like a song slightly out of tune. She tapped her chin, her brain spinning fast. She wasn't sure yet, but something felt off. Meanwhile, Malcolm typed quietly, logging test results and updating the internal server. He didn't speak up when one of the lead engineers shouted about the system's instability. He could already guess the problem, but he knew no one would take him seriously, so he stayed silent, watching the numbers, listening, waiting. But Zuri wasn't going to stay quiet forever. She had an idea, and her fingers were already moving. Sketching something on her tablet, it was the beginning of a solution, a spark waiting to ignite, and neither of them knew it yet, but everything was about to change. Zuri didn't mean to speak up. She really didn't. But after 2 more hours of listening to grown-ups say the same thing over and over, something inside her cracked. She had been watching the wall monitor the entire time, tracing the repeating data patterns with her eyes. The screen flickered every now and then, just a blink, barely noticeable to anyone else. But not to her. She had seen the error, not just once, but 12 times. Each time it happened, the lines of code slowed for exactly 4 seconds, then jumped. It was like watching a music track skip the same beat again and again. She knew music. She played piano back home, and this looked wrong. It wasn't about code to her. It was rhythm, timing, and structure. Her fingers twitched as she watched a senior engineer slam his notebook on the table. He shouted something about scrapping the entire system and starting fresh. Everyone began arguing again, voices overlapping like a storm. Zuri turned her eyes to her father, who sat calm and silent, still typing. She tugged on his sleeve, gently. "Dad," she whispered, "that line on the left, it always lags the same way." Malcolm looked down at her. Surprised, he leaned closer. "What do you mean?" Zuri tilted her tablet and showed him a drawing. She had traced out the data flow with her fingers, drawing curves, loops, and spikes. Her voice was soft but sure. "This shape shouldn't happen unless something's wrong, right?" Malcolm blinked, then looked up at the screen. He hadn't noticed it until now. But she was right. The lag matched a timing glitch he had flagged days ago. He had submitted a quiet report back then, and no one had responded. He turned to her again. "You really saw that?" She nodded. "And I think it's from the loop here." She pointed. "Someone copied a command twice. It's jumping in circles." Malcolm didn't know whether to laugh or hug her. Instead, he just whispered, "Stay here, let me try something." He opened a notepad and began copying the section of code she had pointed at. He rewrote it the way she described, simplified and clean, then saved the change in a local test environment. He ran the code, just a trial, and waited on the wall. Screen, the data moved smoother. No flickers, no lag. Number 0 for second jumps. Just clean, perfect flow. One of the engineers noticed first. "Hey, what happened to the test channel?" Another looked up, then gasped. "Wait, who ran that version?" Malcolm stood slowly and cleared his throat. "It was me." The room turned to look, most of them blinking like they were seeing him for the first time. Mr. Callahan, the CEO, was at the far end of the table, eyes sharp and quiet. He raised a brow. "Mr. D, what exactly did you change?" Malcolm hesitated, then looked down at Zuri, who smiled nervously from the corner. He turned back. "My daughter noticed something," he said, voice steady. "She saw a pattern in the data flow, and we tested her idea." The room was dead. Silent, Zuri shifted in her chair, holding her tablet close. Mr. Callahan slowly walked across the room and stopped in front of her. He knelt down to her level, looked her in the eyes, and asked, "Can you explain it to me?" Zuri hesitated, but her father nodded. Giving her courage, she pointed at her sketch. "This line jumps because the code here," she tapped the spot, "is repeated too many times. It causes the system to double-check the same thing when it doesn't need to." Mr. Callahan leaned in, studying her notes. One of the engineers came over and muttered, "She's not wrong. This is a recursion error, but I never saw it that way." Zuri shrugged. "It looked like music skipping, so I followed the beat." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then another voice. "We've been breaking our heads over this for weeks." Someone chuckled nervously. A kid just solved $1 billion problem. Mr. Callahan stood up and smiled. Not mocking, but genuinely impressed. He turned to Malcolm. She gets that from you, doesn't she? Malcolm said nothing, but the look on his face said everything. Run it again, the CEO said. Confirm it. Test it. Document everything. The room burst into quiet movement. Fingers flying over keyboards, screens updating, systems stabilizing. Zuri watched in awe as the data on the wall became smooth like silk. Mr. Callahan walked to Malcolm and said, I want a full report, and I want to talk about your file. Then he looked back at Zuri. And I want to know everything about her. Zuri looked up at her dad, unsure what she had done. He smiled and whispered, You just did something no one else could. In the span of minutes, the girl, no one noticed, had become the center of the room, and the man everyone ignored was finally being heard. Zuri didn't feel like a genius. She felt like a girl who saw something weird on a screen and spoke up. But now, everyone was looking at her differently. Some people smiled at her with surprise. Others whispered behind their hands, and a few didn't look happy at all. The room was quieter now. The energy changed. The chaos from before had vanished. Replaced by focused typing and controlled voices, every engineer was running tests. Copying Zuri's logic, tweaking code around her pattern, and it worked over and over again. The system that once crashed every hour was now stable, like nothing had ever gone wrong. Mr. Callahan stood with his arms crossed. Watching it all happen, every so often, he glanced at Zuri and shook his head with disbelief. He had built this company from a garage startup into a billion-dollar tech empire. He had met MIT graduates, Silicon Valley geniuses, and coders who could write programs in their sleep, but none of them had spotted what this little girl did in a matter of minutes. He called his assistant over and whispered, Get me her father's personnel file. Then he said, And call legal I want to know what kind of recognition or reward we're allowed to offer a minor. Meanwhile, Zuri sat back in her chair, chewing a gummy worm she found in her backpack. Malcolm sat beside her, finally taking a breath. For years he had kept his head low, but now his daughter had pulled both of them into the spotlight. He didn't know whether to be proud or afraid. A tall man in a black jacket approached them, holding a tablet and fake smile. He crouched down and said, Hey there, Zuri, right? That was really clever of you. Zuri nodded, not sure what to say. I'm Leon, he said. I'm head of system security. Maybe we can talk later about how your brain works, huh? Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Protective. She's just a kid. Leon laughed softly. Right, of course. Just curious. That's all. But Malcolm saw if the look in his eyes wasn't just curiosity. It was something sharper, something calculating. As the day went on, more people came to shake Zuri's hand. Some offered her candy. Others asked silly questions, like what books she read or what games she liked. Zuri answered politely, but something in her gut felt off. Not everyone was happy she had solved the problem. Some people seemed threatened. One woman in a blue suit whispered loudly enough for Malcolm to hear, We spent 4 weeks on that, and a child gets the credit. Another man said, Maybe the dad did it and just gave the kid the story. Malcolm heard every word, but he stayed calm. He had been through worse, much worse. Let them talk, he thought. Zuri's work would speak louder than their jealousy. Mr. Callahan called for a private meeting that evening. Only 10 people invited. Surprisingly, Malcolm was one of them. Even more surprising, Zuri was too. In the glass boardroom at the top floor, the sun was setting behind the tall city buildings. Casting gold and purple light into the room, Mr. Callahan stood at the head of the long table with folders in front of him. He began to speak. Ladies and gentlemen, today something rare happened. He turned to Zuri. A problem we thought was impossible was solved by someone we least expected. Some people smiled politely. Others sat stiff. Mr. Callahan continued. I've reviewed the system logs. watched the live test, and spoken to our legal team. He placed a folder in front of Malcolm. Inside is a new contract offer, a promotion, and full acknowledgement of the contribution made today. Malcolm opened it and stared. His position had been upgraded. His pay nearly doubled, and Zori's name was listed as honorary systems consultant. Mr. Callahan looked at Zori again. You may not know this, but today you saved us from losing everything. Zori shifted in her seat. I didn't mean to do anything big, he smiled. That's usually how greatness begins. But the moment didn't last long. Leon, the security head, leaned forward and said, with all due respect, sir, this situation could be dangerous. Mr. Callahan raised an eyebrow. Dangerous? Leon nodded. We're about to give recognition to an unsupervised minor who accessed live production data. Word gets out. Regulators could question our security. Malcolm clenched his fists. She didn't hack anything. She was just watching, Leon replied. That doesn't matter in headlines. The room filled with quiet tension. Some people nodded with Leon, others looked uncomfortable. Mr. Callahan stayed silent for a moment, then said, We're not going to punish brilliance just because it came from the unexpected. Zuri whispered to her dad, Did I do something wrong? Malcolm squeezed her hand. No, baby. You just made them nervous because you're right. As the meeting ended, Malcolm and Zuri walked out together. They could feel eyes on their backs. The hallway lights flickered above them as they stepped into the elevator. Zori looked up at her dad. Why did they look so angry when everything worked? Malcolm gave a sad smile. Because some people don't like it when the truth comes from someone they never thought to listen to. The elevator doors closed slowly. Ziri stood a little taller, and Malcolm stood a little prouder. Neither of them saw what was waiting on the company's internal chat rooms, or in the minds of jealous engineers. But one thing was clear. Something had been set in motion, and there was no turning back. The next morning, Malcolm and Zori woke up early. Neither of them had slept much. Zori's mind kept running through the lines of code she had seen the day before. Malcolm kept thinking about the way some people looked at them in that boardroom, not with pride, but with quiet judgment. They arrived at the office to find the parking lot half full already. Inside, things were different. The usual buzz of keyboards and coffee machines was replaced with quiet stares and fake smiles. People whispered as they walked past, pretending to be polite. Some nodded at Malcolm for the first time in years. But their eyes didn't match their smiles when they reached Malcolm's desk. A small sticky note was stuck to his monitor. It read, "Watch your back, superhero." He peeled it off slowly and didn't say a word. Zuri looked at him, unsure. What does that mean? Malcolm just said, nothing important, and tossed the note in the trash. But he knew it meant something. Some people weren't happy about the credit Zuri received. Later that morning, Mr. Callahan held a live company meeting. Employees across all offices joined via hologram. He proudly shared news about the system recovery and hinted at a surprise contributor. He didn't name Zuri directly, but he did mention a sharp mind, unexpected and young, who helped them avoid a billion-dollar failure. Zuri watched from the side, eating a small muffin. She didn't understand the weight of his words, but Malcolm did. He saw the way it landed with the team, the way people shifted in their seats, the way some rolled their eyes after the announcement. A few journalists started calling the company's PR line. Word had spread. Somehow, there were rumors now. A child saves billion-dollar system. Mystery girl rewrites code. Who is the real genius? None of them had the full story, but it was enough to stir something deep inside the building. That afternoon, a woman from the legal department approached Malcolm. She had a kind face, but a tight tone. We need you to sign some paperwork regarding yesterday's system update, she said. Malcolm read it carefully, pages about data, access, intellectual property, non-disclosure agreements. It looked like they were trying to protect themselves, not him, not Zuri. He asked, "Why does my daughter's name need to be in this legal file?" The woman replied, "Just procedure. He didn't sign anything, not yet. He said he'd review it with a lawyer." The woman didn't look pleased, but she nodded and walked away. That evening, as they left the office, Malcolm noticed a man in a suit sitting in a black car across the street. The same car was there the next morning, and again the next day. He didn't say anything to Zuri, but he started walking her to school himself instead of letting her take the shuttle. Something about all of this didn't feel right anymore. Zuri, on the other hand, was being treated like a celebrity at her school. Her math teacher asked if she could help tutor older students. The principal called her a bright spark of the future. Even kids who never spoke to her before now tried to sit near her during lunch. Zuri wasn't sure if they really liked her, or just liked the story. One evening, she asked, "Dad, did I mess everything up by speaking that day?" Malcolm shook his head. "No, baby, you did what you were born to do," she asked. "Then why does it feel like I made people mad?" he sighed. "Because you did something they couldn't. And instead of learning from it, some of them would rather blame you." That night, someone tried to log in to Malcolm's work terminal from a different location. An alert hit his phone unauthorized access attempt. He changed his passwords, locked down Zuri's tablet, and installed extra protection. He wasn't a paranoid man, but he was a smart one. He had worked in security too long not to know when someone was trying to dig into his life. At the same time, the CEO was facing pressure from his board. Some of them questioned the wisdom of letting a child be involved in system work even unofficially. One board member suggested putting a lid on the story before it damaged their credibility. But Mr. Callahan refused. "I won't bury talent just because it's inconvenient," he said. Still, he knew a storm was building. By the end of the week, Malcolm received an anonymous message on his private device. Just a few words: "Pull her out now, or we'll do it for you." His blood ran cold. Who was behind it? An angry coworker? A jealous competitor? Someone inside the board? He didn't know, but now, he wasn't just protecting a daughter, he was protecting a gift. And the world wasn't ready for it. Malcolm stared at the screen, the message still glowing. "Pull her out now, or we'll do it for you." He read it 3 times, hoping it was some kind of prank. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. The sender was anonymous. The encryption was advanced. Whoever wrote this didn't just know how to code, they knew how to hide. He deleted the message from the screen, but it stayed in his mind. He looked over at Zuri, who was humming to herself while sketching out a new robot design. In her notebook, she had no idea, and he didn't want her to. That night, after putting her to bed, Malcolm opened a locked drawer and pulled out his old laptop, the one he hadn't used in years. It wasn't connected to the company's network, and that made it safe. He ran a scan on all recent logs, emails, and login attempts from the last 72 hours. Someone had definitely tried to access Zuri's records, and not just once, multiple times. From different locations, he leaned back in his chair, hands folded under his chin. This wasn't just jealousy anymore. Someone felt threatened. Enough to intimidate a child and risk everything to shut them up. The next morning, Malcolm walked Zuri to school as usual, but this time he didn't leave. He stood across the street, arms folded, watching every person who entered and exited the building. After 20 minutes, he saw a man in a dark hoodie standing too close to the side fence. When Malcolm made eye contact, the man turned and walked away fast, disappearing into a black van down the block. That was all the proof he needed. He walked into the school and met with the principal. "I need Zuri taken off the public record system," he said. "No photos, no interviews, no shared documents." The principal looked confused. "Is something wrong?" Malcolm didn't explain, just repeated, "Please." Make sure she disappears from every database you control. Later that day, Malcolm visited Mr. Callahan's office without an appointment. The receptionist tried to stop him, but Malcolm's eyes were sharp and his tone was calm but firm. When Callahan saw him walk in, he stood up immediately. "Malcolm, what's wrong?" Malcolm placed a printed copy of the threat on the CEO's desk. Callahan read it silently, his expression turning hard. "I was hoping this wouldn't happen," he finally said. Malcolm narrowed his eyes. "You knew this was coming." Callahan nodded. "There's a lot of money riding on that system Zuri helped fix. And some powerful people didn't like being shown up by a little girl. Powerful, like who?" Malcolm asked. Callahan sighed. "Some investors, some competitors. Maybe even someone on our board. I can't prove anything, but the pressure is real." Malcolm leaned forward. "If anything happens to my daughter, anything you'll wish you never met me." Callahan didn't flinch. "I believe you," he said, "and I want to help." He opened a secure server on his tablet and forwarded Malcolm a private security contact. "Ex-military," he said, "trustworthy, off the books, by evening." Malcolm had moved Zuri's tablet to a new operating system, replaced her SIM card, and rerouted their internet connection through 4 firewalls. She noticed it right away. "Dad, why is everything different?" He smiled, trying to sound casual. "Just an upgrade, sweet pea. Nothing to worry about." But she wasn't fooled. "Are we being watched?" she asked. Malcolm paused, then nodded slowly. "Yes, but only because you're amazing." She frowned. "I didn't ask for this." He sat beside her. "Greatness never does." That night, someone tried to break into their apartment. The door's smart lock sent an alert, and Malcolm watched through the security camera as 2 masked figures tried to bypass the system. They failed his custom-coded firewall, froze the lock, and sent out a fake police alarm. The intruders ran, but Malcolm didn't feel any safer. He packed 2 bags, woke Zuri quietly, and they left through the fire stairs before sunrise. They moved to a small apartment across town, owned by one of Malcolm's old friends. It wasn't much, but it was hidden. Zuri was confused and tired. "Are we running away?" Malcolm shook his head. "No, we're just staying ahead. At work, Mr. R." Callahan launched an internal investigation. But the deeper they looked, the more doors closed. Digital trails were wiped, access logs deleted, names hidden behind anonymous proxies. Whoever was behind it wasn't just skilled, they had help. And now someone had suggested cutting all ties with Malcolm entirely, quietly firing him, ending the contract, and pretending none of it ever happened. But Callahan wasn't that kind of man. He called Malcolm again, voice low. "They want you gone." "But I'm not letting that happen," Malcolm replied. "They don't want me gone." "Callahan, they want her silenced." And just like that, the stakes became personal for everyone. Zuri wasn't just a bright kid anymore. She was a threat to people who had built their power on being the smartest in the room, and now one little girl had cracked their image, their pride, and their control. They wanted it back, no matter the cost. But Malcolm was no longer going to sit in the corner and be ignored. He was a father, a coder, and now a shield. And he was ready to fight. The small apartment had only 2 rooms, 1 bed, and a shaky table with 1 leg shorter than the rest. But for Malcolm and Zuri, it was safer than the sleek condo they had left behind. The windows stayed closed, the curtains drawn, and their devices ran only on local networks Malcolm built himself. Every night before sleeping, he placed a chair against the front door. Not because he thought it would stop anyone, but because it gave him a moment to breathe. Zuri tried to act like it was just another adventure. She called it Spy Hideout version 30. And taped a sign outside her bedroom. No villains allowed. But Malcolm could see through her smile. She missed her school, her bed, her robot kits. And she hated the way her dad always looked over his shoulder now. Still, something inside Her had changed too. The moment she realized people were scared of her brains, something clicked. Ziri began reading more, coding faster, solving problems like she was running out of time. Malcolm noticed the way she stayed up late with a flashlight, scribbling notes and diagrams. "Sweet pea, you need to sleep," he told her one night. She replied, "I will." After I finish this idea, he looked at her page and blinked. She was redesigning the company's entire data flow using only visual pattern logic. And somehow, it made more sense than what grown engineers had spent years building. Malcolm took screenshots, backed it all up, and saved it in a hidden drive. Whatever happened next, he was going to protect her work. Meanwhile, Mr. Callahan had reached a breaking point. The board was pressing harder, calling emergency meetings, pushing contracts into review, and even freezing Malcolm's system access. The legal team had started rewriting documents to cover their tracks. One senior manager even whispered, "We could call it a test anomaly and erase her name from everything." But Callahan wasn't done yet. He sent a secure message to Malcolm. "Meet me off record. Tonight, 11 p.m., warehouse level 3. Don't bring devices." Malcolm didn't like it, but he went. He told Zori to lock the door and answer only if he said the special knock they had practiced. She nodded bravely and hugged him tight. "Be careful," she whispered. He kissed her forehead. Always, at the warehouse. Dim lights flickered. Above rusted metal beams, Callahan stood alone in a jacket, holding a folder wrapped in plastic. "I don't have much time," he said, "but you need to see this." Inside the folder were printed screenshots, internal emails, and time-stamped video logs. It showed proof people inside the company had been trying to erase Zuri's work from the official servers. Some had even suggested fabricating a crash to cover up what really happened. Malcolm's jaw clenched. They want to destroy the truth. Callahan nodded, and they're close. "But there's more," he said, pulling out a flash drive. "This holds a backup of every log Zuri triggered when she fixed the system, including her access point, the real timestamps, and system responses." Malcolm took the drive and placed it inside his coat. "What do I do now?" he asked. Callahan hesitated. "Expose them, but not from inside." He looked around, lowered his voice. "I can't protect you much longer, Malcolm. They're planning to cut me out too." Malcolm didn't sleep that night. He sat on the floor beside Ziri's bed, listening to her breathing. He thought about everything: how a 13-year-old girl could become a threat, how a billion-dollar company could act like a scared child, and how the truth was now a weapon. The next morning, Ziri woke up to find her dad pacing the room. "Are we moving again?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, we're going to fight." Her eyes lit up. "Really?" Malcolm smiled. "But we do it smart. Your way, for the next 3 days." They worked side by side. Malcolm built a secure mirror server outside of the company's reach. Ziri rewrote the entire story, not in words, but in data. She created a timeline using visual logic, linking every event with lines of working code and reaction. Anyone reading it could see clearly what had happened and how she had solved the impossible. They didn't call the press. They didn't go to social media. They sent the file to just 5 people, people with voices louder than money. A retired journalist known for whistleblowing, science blogger with 4 million followers, a professor from a top university, a child genius advocate, and one teenage coding champion Zori admired since she was 9. By the end of the week, the story exploded. 13-year-old girl outsmarts billion-dollar tech company, hidden genius exposes corporate sabotage, truth in code. How a child revealed what adults buried, and with it came support, thousands of messages, interviews, scholarship, offers, legal protection offers. Mr. Callahan was removed from his position, but not before he leaked internal audio of board members discussing how to erase Ziri. The company tried to apologize, but the world was no longer listening to them. They were listening to her. The world didn't just watch, It stood up after Zuri's story exploded online. People from all over began speaking up. Messages poured in: scientists, teachers, engineers, even school kids. Some said she inspired them. Some said they'd faced the same silence. A few even admitted they had been told they'd never be smart enough just like her. Within days, public pressure forced the company to hold a press conference. Malcolm and Zuri were invited, but they didn't attend. Instead, they watched it from their new apartment, now protected by private security and trusted friends. Mr. Callahan appeared via video, no longer in charge, but still speaking. He looked directly into the camera and said, "A mistake was made, not in the code, but in the way we see value. A 13-year-old girl saw what our top experts missed, and instead of celebrating her, many tried to erase her." He paused, his voice heavier than before. "Zuri, if you're watching this, know this: you changed more than just lines of code. You changed a system." The world listened. But more important, Zuri listened. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just nodded slowly. Her work had spoken. Her voice had been heard. Soon after, offers came from every direction. One from a top tech university offering full mentorship. An early entrance, another from a foundation that supported gifted girls in science. Even the government sent a quiet message, offering to meet with her and her father in private. Malcolm didn't know what to say. He had spent years being overlooked, underestimated, forgotten, but now people wanted interviews with him, not about his job, but about how he raised someone like Zuri. He always gave the same answer: "I just let her be curious. And I listened when she spoke." Zuri was invited to speak at a global youth tech summit. She wore simple jeans, a jacket 2 sizes too big, and tied her braids in a messy knot. She stepped up to the mic. It's a room full of cameras and lights. She looked nervous, but her voice was clear. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just saw a problem and thought of a way to fix it. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just wanted to help." She paused, then looked directly at the front row, where a group of young girls sat wide-eyed. And if you're sitting there thinking, "I'm just a kid," or "no one will listen to me," I'm here to tell you you're wrong. You matter, your ideas matter, even if they ignore you. Don't ignore yourself. The room stood up in applause, not just because of what she said, but because of who she was. Not just a genius, not just a girl, but a reminder. Back at home, Malcolm and Zuri returned to something close to normal. They didn't go back to the old company. Instead, they started something of their own. A small nonprofit that gave young kids access to real coding tools. No matter their background, Zuri named it the Pattern Project, she said. Because sometimes the problem isn't the code, it's the way we look at it. One evening, a package arrived, no return address. Inside was a black notebook with gold lettering. It was the old system design book from Malcolm's company, the one that had sparked the billion-dollar failure. But someone had added a sticky note on the front. In simple handwriting, it read, "For the girl who found what none of us could. Thank you, a former rival." Malcolm chuckled when he read it. Zuri just smiled and placed it on her shelf, right between her first puzzle cube and a framed photo of her mom. The danger had passed. The fear had faded. But the truth had stayed. Zuri had changed the world not by force, not with power, but with patience, curiosity, and courage. And somewhere out there, in a corner of the world, a child sat watching her story on a screen. Eyes wide, heart beating fast, thinking, if she can do it, maybe I can too. And that was the real victory. It had been 1 year. 1 year since Zuri changed everything with a single whisper. 1 year since her father stood up, not just for her, but for truth. And in that 1 year, their world had become something new, something bigger, something brighter. Zuri no longer walked into rooms unnoticed. Now, every time she stepped onto a stage or entered a school, People leaned in not because she demanded it, but because the world had learned to listen. She still loved puzzles, still built tiny robots from scrap. But now, she also helped build systems used in real classrooms, hospitals, and shelters. Her nonprofit, the Pattern Project, had expanded faster than anyone expected. What started with a few tablets in a dusty room had become a network of learning hubs across 5 cities. Kids who had never seen a real computer were now writing code, building drones, and solving problems in their own communities. Zuri visited each site when she could. She didn't give long speeches. She sat with the kids, asked what they were working on, and listened. To her, they weren't just students. They were teammates, creators, future builders. Malcolm watched all this from the background. He had returned to work, but this time on his own terms. He helped small startups build ethical systems. He trained engineers who had never been taken seriously before. And every evening, he came home to the same thing: Zuri at the table, sketching new ideas, humming softly to herself. People still asked him the same question over and over again. How did you raise a genius? He always answered the same way. I didn't raise a genius. I raised a girl who believed she could figure things out. One afternoon, Zuri received a letter. Not an email, not a digital message, but a real envelope. Sealed with wax, inside was an invitation. She had been selected to join a global innovation council and international group of young minds working on real-world solutions. She blinked twice and reread it out loud to her dad. They want me to advise them on climate models. Malcolm grinned. Looks like the world finally caught up to you. But Zuri was hesitant. She looked at her father, eyes unsure. I don't want to leave the kids at Pattern Project behind. Malcolm knelt beside her. Sweet pea, you won't leave them. You'll show them what comes next. You'll open the door wider, so they know there's more waiting. A few weeks later, Zuri stood on a stage in Geneva, surrounded by screens, dignitaries, and cameras. She wore a simple black hoodie with the Pattern Project logo stitched on the sleeve. She didn't read from a paper. She spoke from memory, from heart, from truth. Sometimes, she began, the best ideas don't come from boardrooms or fancy labs. Sometimes they come from bedrooms with bad lighting, from notebooks with chocolate stains, from kids who see patterns because they've lived inside systems no one wants to talk about. The room was silent. Not a single phone rang. Not a single person looked away. She continued, I'm not here because I was the smartest. I'm here because I was lucky enough to have someone who listened when I spoke. My dad listened. He let me try. He didn't laugh when I was wrong and when I was right. He stood beside me, not in front of me. Tears welled up in some eyes. In the back row, Malcolm sat still, hands folded in his lap, eyes locked on his daughter. He didn't clap right away. He just smiled, the kind of smile that held pride deeper than words. After the event, a young girl no older than 8 walked up to Zuri with her mother. She held out a piece of paper with scribbles and circuits. I made this after watching your video, the girl said. I think it could help purify water from plastic. Zuri took the paper like it was made of gold. She knelt, looked the girl in the eyes and said, That's a beautiful idea. Don't let anyone tell you it isn't. Malcolm watched from the side. It reminded him of a day not so long ago. A day in a cold tech room, with a wall full of broken code and a little girl tugging his sleeve. A whisper, a question, a moment that changed everything. Now, the world called her brilliant, gifted, revolutionary. But to him, she would always be Zuri, his daughter. The girl who saw patterns no one else could see. The girl who reminded the world that sometimes genius wears braids, carries crayons, and just wants to help. As they walked out of the building together, hands full of letters and gifts from strangers, Zuri looked up at her dad. Hey, she said. You think this is the end of the story? Malcolm chuckled. No, sweet pea. He looked out at the glowing city around them. This is just the start. And together, They walked into the future, not as heroes, not as legends, but as a father and daughter who chose to believe in each other. And that was more powerful than anything the world could offer.